is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, chapters 5 and 6. In these chapters, the mighty holy emperor has died. I feel like poisoned. Maybe. Poison's a big thing in this universe. His son, poison, also. So here comes the second son, who's 12 years old. This should go well. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. This episode is brought to you by Kyle Summers, who is in the chat here. So welcome, Kyle, and my apologies, everybody, because I got some real bad news today, and I'm just if I sound kind of weird today, that'll be why. And poor Kyle had to suffer through me breaking down a little bit before I started this episode. But these two chapters, there's a lot happening. Because of the way this book has gone so far, I think I should have seen it coming that the time jumps weren't over. Because it's, jumped ahead a couple years and then, again, I still didn't though. I wasn't prepared for that. So when we get this chapter that's called The Death of the Emperor, first of all, part of me was like, is this a setup? Is this author naming the chapter Death of the Emperor and then that's a metaphor or something? But no, it is not. The emperor is ailing, and he has been for quite a while, and he has this one advisor, the chancellor, is that it? Chamberlain, my bad. Goran Pira, who has some medicine for him that really numbs the pain, and he thanks him for coming up with something that's so successful in banishing pain. But there's something about this that really makes me feel like the Chamberlain is behind his death, because when he's dying, the main thing that we know is that he has stomach pain, which of course could be many things. For all we know, he's not even he's saying it's stomach pain and it's just in the vicinity of his midsection, and that's not actually his stomach. All I could think was ground glass. That's something that was a method that I learned about as a type. I hesitate to even use the word poison, because for me the idea of a poison is chemical, whereas glass is obviously very physical. But I'm going to call it poison simply because it was snuck in via food. But that was something I learned about when I was in London for the first time, and we were touring the Tower of London, and there was somebody who, one of the beefeaters was giving a tour and talked about a person who had been killed with ground glass snuck into their food, and it slices up your stomach from the inside until you basically bleed out. And the symptoms of it are so strange that it can baffle doctors. But I feel like this Chamberlain, who is sort of behind some other stuff that winds up happening, he doesn't seem to be it doesn't seem like he has necessarily a grand plan. He just, I'm going to get this person in place because they're easy to control, and that's sort of it. And so we'll see where that winds up going. So yeah. Goran, the pain is much better. This is a good find. Chamberlain Pira bowed. I am your loyal servant, as always. You're my friend, the emperor said. My only true friend. All right, so let's get into the emperor's thoughts about how everything goes down when he begins to take control and unite all of the different lands. First of all, we have this long dream sequence. One could say it seems as if there is a suggestion at the end of this chapter or the end of the next chapter that these gods are actually real and that they walk around and have conversations like we're in a Greek myth, you know, which, if that is true, is kind of rad. But it's sort of unclear right now. And because this sequence is followed by him taking that drug and falling asleep, that's what I assumed here. So he goes to this area where there are all of these statues that honor all of the gods, 8 gods, and he bows before them, and they begin to have a conversation, which boils down to basically them being like, yeah, we get that you thought you were going to be preventing more bloodshed by starting this war, but like, as much as we understand that you think you believe that, we can't possibly think that you're that stupid. Which is sort of like how I feel about a lot of people with this sort of mindset, is just like, it seems like you're genuinely that idiotic, but I can't let myself believe that. So we have, let's see. Have you forgotten our pact? Said Rappa, whose voice was mellifluous, cool, harmonious, but no less powerful than her sister's. I'm not the one agitating for further bloodshed, said Kiji. He lifted his left hand, which was missing a pinky, placed the index and middle fingers into his mouth, and whistled. The falcon, still gazing balefully at the ravens, reluctantly returned to his shoulder. Taking away weapons, because we had a little moment of the emperor being like, I wanted to take everyone's weapons away and melt them down, and then there would be peace, which, like, listen, I'm in favor of gun control and everything, don't get me wrong, but I'm not stupid enough to think that means peace. Taking away men's weapons will not bring peace. They'll fight with sticks and stones and tooth and nail. Mapidaries is a peace supported only by fear, as secure as a nest built on a rotten branch. Mapidari despaired at the words of Lord Fithoeo, the god of the hunt, of metals and stone and war and peace. The emperor looked into the god's eyes, the cold, dark obsidian from Mount Fithoeo, and saw no compassion. His Paui, the wolf, howled to accompany the end of his master's rumbling speech. Yeah, I feel like that's pretty accurate. Based on fear, fear is just no way to get anything done. Fear is a reasonable reaction to things. Don't get me wrong. But you can't use fear as a motivating factor for action. It's just the wrong way to go about anything. And I wish that we, as a culture and as like a race of human beings, could understand that. But we never really do seem to learn, do we? Because we're so convinced that the fear is like based in something that's ultimately good, so the fear is okay. And it's easy to convince yourself of whatever the fuck you want, let's be honest. So let's see. Enough of this posturing, my brothers and sisters. After the diaspora wars, during which all of us caused our mothers much grief, we vowed that the gods would never again harm one another, as Moano is our witness. During all the years of Mapidari's wars, we kept peace among us. Today is not the day to break that promise. So the whole thing is that the gods had agreed to never directly join in the fight against the mortals, which means a different thing to different gods, as it turns out. Like, there's all kinds of ways to sort of get around that. This is like the Trojan War, right? If you read the mythology there, that like gods were definitely going and interfering when they said that they wouldn't. Like, they had agreed to not. But guess what? They totally did. And they do it in these like underhanded ways, hoping that nobody's going to notice. And of course, you know, the gods, let's talk about that really quick, because here I am comforted a little bit by the fact that the gods seem a little bit smarter, but the gods in like Greek myth and stuff were not smart necessarily. They were just straight up assholes. And I can even forgive assholes if they are intelligent assholes, but they're not. Some of them are, and many of them are simply reactionary and selfish and just as flawed as people, which is just, that's not a comforting thought at all. So the whole deal here is all of them like arguing about what they're going to do, who they're going to support. I've always honored all of you, croaked Mapidere, his voice almost inaudible as Tazu continued to laugh. I have always tried only to make the world of men more perfect, closer to the world of the gods. And this is when Lutho, who I think is my favorite, Lutho, the god of Han, a stocky old fisherman whose skin was as dark as freshly solidified lava, lifted his foot off his powie, a giant sea turtle, threw out the fishing net on his back, and pulled Mapidere to safety. There is often no line between perfection and evil. Mapidere struggled to breathe. Lutho's words made no sense to him, but that was to be expected of the Lord of Tricks, Mathematics, and Divination, whose domain was beyond the understanding of mortals. The Lord of Tricks, Mathematics, and Divination, which I adore the fact that those things are all being grouped together. That's fantastic. 100% cosign. Yes, mathematics is a trick, and divination is math. I know that's not really what that means, but I'm just leaning into it. I just love it. So I had not expected you to take a side in this coming war. Mapidere, now forgotten, felt his old heart clench. So it's to be a war again? Has my life's project been in vain? Oh, I can't possibly be bothered with something as restraining as picking a side, said Tazu. I'm interested only in more treasure and bones for my underwater palace. I'll do whatever supplies me more of either. You can say I'm a neutral observer, like Refizo over there, except he wants fewer people to die, and I want the opposite. What about you, old man? Me? Asked Lutho in mock surprise. You know I never had the talent for fighting and politics. I've always been interested only in Mapidere's alchemists. Right, scoffed Tazu. I think you're biding your time and waiting for a winning side to emerge, you trickster. Lutho smiled and said nothing. And then we finally have the last goddess who hasn't spoken yet. As the youngest of you all, and the least experienced, I've never understood your appetites for power and blood. All I've ever wanted was to enjoy the beauty of my realm and the praise of my people. Why must we always end up as a house divided? Why can't we just promise one another not to be involved in the affairs of mortals at all? After a while, Kiji said, You speak as if history does not matter. You know well how the people of Zana were treated by the other states before Mapidere's wars. Looked down upon, cheated, taken advantage of. Zana suffered for years and lost blood and treasure until the insults could not be borne. Now that they're finally treated with respect, how can I do nothing when they're threatened? Do not presume to speak of only your history, said Tutitika. The suffering of Amu was also great during Mapidere's conquests. Exactly, said Kiji triumphantly. If the people of Amu now cry out again for your help as they die, will you stand by and plug up your ears as you enjoy the sunsets on a Rulugi island, no doubt made even more beautiful by the smoke and ashes of burning cities? Guys, yikes. They are just like, yeah, this is not a good situation. Like, none of this conversation is reassuring. We can guide, but war cannot be controlled. A lesson that mortals have learned again and again, said Rappa, but it doesn't seem to take, finished Kana. Then we should pity this man whose work is about to be undone. Great men are always misunderstood by their own age, and great seldom means good. The goddess glided toward Mapidere, her blue silk gown spreading open like the calm sky. Her pawi, a golden carp whose sparkling scales dazzled the emperor, swam through the air before her like a living airship. Go, Tutitika said. You have no more time. Yeah, so that's a lot. I really, like, I hate the great men being used as, because, you know, great is not good. Yes, we all know that, but the tone of great men, you can't help but take as a positive when it's first said to you. He was a great man. Does that make you think that, oh, he was a hugely powerful man who had the potential for evil like anyone else? No. You hear the words, he was a great man, and it is an implication that he was also good, and at least on the side of right, mostly. And it's so hard to, like, have this moment, which is like straight out of fucking Harry Potter, where we have the wand maker talking to Harry and saying, like, he did great things with this wand. Terrible, yes, but great. Don't do it. Don't say it, first of all, at all, but also maybe just, like, don't say it to the child whose parents were killed by this man. Just a thought. But yeah, so I have a real problem with the great being used as, like, powerful. Just say powerful. Just say hugely influential. Say something like, but don't, great doesn't mean the thing that it used to mean anymore. All right. So it had been the dream of generations of kings of Zana to win the respect of the rest of the islands of Dara, which this is the first time we're hearing this information, that not only was Dara looked down on in general, but that it was like the bottom of the totem pole, really. And I don't think it had occurred to me that these islands were so in competition with each other in a weird way, which it should, because that's just how people are. Like, there's tribalism is a real thing, you know, and nationalism and whatever. And even if you're islands that, like, exist pretty close to each other and seem to have a lot of vested interest in helping one another, that kind of competitive nature is going to out. But I just didn't really stop and think about it. The men of those other Tiro states, closer together and more populous, had always treated remote Zana with contempt. Comedians from Amu mocked her accent. Merchants from Gan cheated her buyers. Poets from Kukru imagined her a land without manners, barely better than the savages who had once lived in Dara before the settlement. The insults and slights became part of the memory of every Zana child who encountered outsiders. Respect had to be earned by force. The men of Dara must be made to tremble before the might of Zana. The rise of Zana was slow and took many years. So then we get the history of how the airships came to be and their discovery of the certain gas that's only available on their island that allows the airships to not only rise, but to be sustained in the air for long periods and thus maneuvered in a way that other airships that obviously the other lands copied the idea of these airships initially, but Zana was the only one that had access to this particular kind of fuel. So they were able to build better airships with more offensive power, which turned out to be pretty much unbeatable. Like, it was just not something that you could stand up against, because in defending yourself from these airships, you have to fire, like, bolts into the air that are laden with explosives. And if you don't aim perfectly and hit them exactly right, those bolts have to come back down again. And if you have other ships in the water or other ships around them in the air, you're putting your other forces in as much risk as you are the actual enemy. So, yeah, it's a compelling little story. The discovery of this one particular type of fuel being like the real turning point, but that's how shit goes, weirdly, a lot of the time. So Rion declared himself Lord of all Dara and renamed himself Mapidere, the first emperor. He saw himself as the beginning of a new kind of power, a power that would transform the world. The time for kings is over. I am the king of kings. So, the emperor tells Chamberlain Goran Pira to get his son, bring me the crowned prince. I must warn Pulo to prepare for the coming war, thought the emperor. The gods have prophesied it, but perhaps it can still be stopped. Even the gods admit they are not always in control. Chamberlain Goran Pira held his ear close to the emperor's trembling lips and nodded. But there was a glint in his eyes, a glint that the emperor did not see. So, what does he wind up doing? Well, honestly, all right, I just have to preface this, that what follows here is one of the first moments where I actually laughed during this story. We'll get to that in a second, but I just had to say it because, like, I was just caught so off guard by the whole way this goes down. So the Chamberlain gets in touch with the prime minister, who is Krupo. Pira, the Chamberlain, is telling Krupo, like, hey, you know, you're way smarter than the general, but the general is the one who is closest to the crown prince. And if the crown prince becomes emperor, you're going to get replaced. And don't you think that your contributions are worth more than that of an old warrior who knows only how to fight and kill? Krupo said nothing in response and sipped his tea. Pira smiled and pressed further. If the crown prince accedes to the throne, the seal of the prime minister might be handed to Tonyeti, and someone would be looking for a new job. But if young Prince Loshi, your student, were to ascend the throne instead of his brother, things might be very different. Krupo felt the hairs on his back stand on their ends. His eyes widened. What you are saying should not be said. Whether I say something or not, Prime Minister, the world will go on in accordance with its rules. Fortune favors the bold. Pira placed something on the tea tray. He lifted his sleeves so that Krupo could take a quick peek. It was the imperial seal. Whatever document held its impression was the law of the land. Krupo stared at Pira with his dark brown eyes, and Pira stared placidly back. After a moment, Krupo's face relaxed. He sighed. This is a chaotic word, Chamberlain. It can sometimes be difficult for servants to express their loyalty clearly. I will be guided by you. Pira smiled. So, we go back to the Emperor, who is not dead yet. It's obviously on its way. But we get to see some of the crazy shit that he has done from his point of view and how much he justifies all of it. The first project he had conceived of was the Grand Tunnels. He would chain Dara together by a system of undersea tunnels so that never again would the island splinter into rival states. With the tunnels in place, commerce would flow between the islands and peoples would mix. The Empire's soldiers would be able to ride from one end of Dara to the other without ever having to set foot in a boat or airship. This is madness, declared the engineers and scholars. Nature and the gods will not permit it. What will travelers eat and drink? How will they breathe in the darkness under the sea? Where will we find the men to do this? So, do you know what he decides to do here? First of all, he has plans to deal with everything. Like, we'll dig some little side things where we'll grow mushrooms in the dark for food, and we'll use giant bellows for air, and it's all this kind of thing that, like, even if that's doable, how is this better than traveling by ship? Like, honestly, who is going to want to do this? But setting all of that aside, the manpower in order to do this is so vast that he winds up having to conscript men, and it is really ugly. He decreed that every man chosen by lottery had to leave his profession, his fields, his workshop, his family, and go where the emperor wanted him to be to labor under the watchful eyes of Zana soldiers. Young men were forced to leave their families behind for a decade or more as they grew old under the sea, chained in permanent darkness, slaving away for a dream as grand as it was impossible. When men died, their bodies were cremated and the ashes sent home in tiny unmarked boxes no bigger than the wooden tray for holding waste bones and fruit pits, and their sons would be conscripted to take their place. To which obviously this is a literal horror show. Like, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. It's slave labor, for something that's never going to come to pass, that is treated as if it's like, oh, well, it's only one member of your family, but it turns out to be like handed down. So once you get your name drawn in the lottery, like your entire family is basically doomed to have to work on this ridiculous project forever. And when he saw how little progress that had been made, he simply drafted more men. The harshness of your laws is against the teachings of Konfuji, the one true sage, the great scholar Huzotuan, one of the emperor's advisors, had said. Yours are not the acts of a wise ruler. The emperor was disappointed. Mapideri had always respected Tuan and hoped such an enlightened man could see further than the others, but he could not permit the man to live after such criticism. Mapideri gave Tuan a grand funeral and published a collection of his writings posthumously, edited by the emperor himself. I bet it was. Edited by the emperor himself. Wow. What a grand honor. Can you imagine having all of your life's work edited by the man who killed you before it was released? Like how insulting that is. I would haunt the man forever. Like, forget it. And then we have like all of the people who are upset about the uniformity of speech, because he doesn't like that everybody speaks different languages or different kind of versions of the same language, different dialects. And he doesn't like different characters being used to say the same things. And when all of these scholars get angry about this uniformity and this loss of like identity, Mapideri knew perfectly well they were really objecting to the loss of power. Once all the children had been educated under one standard script and one standard dialect, the local scholars no longer could dictate what thoughts could spread within their realm of influence. Which is really amazing, because later on, he says that he doesn't like the older books because they're no longer useful. So he gathers all of them up and has them burned except for one copy, and then has that one copy, like, basically put into a vault that only very certain people can even access. So he's talking about how they're mad that they're losing power, but he's literally book burning to keep people from reading things that he doesn't like. And it's just the exact same thing. But in his mind, this makes total sense. He's nuts. Scholars protested and wrote tracts denouncing him as a tyrant, but they were only scholars with no strength to lift swords. He had 200 of them buried alive and cut off the writing hands of 1,000 more. The protests and tracts stopped. The world was still so imperfect, and great men were always misunderstood in their own age. My favorite thing about this is that that's the part that he remembers. Like, all of these gods are standing around talking about how perfect and good are often the same thing, and that this is built on fear, which is a rotten branch, all of this stuff. But the one fucking thing that the gods said to him that he's keeping in mind is that great men are misunderstood in their own age. And it's really, like, so telling. And I think that we've all either met this person or even been this person during periods of our life where people have said, like, a bunch of they've criticized us, and then at the end they've said, like, one nice thing, or said something like, although I can understand why you thought that this was the right idea. And we just zero in on that and just hold on to it and pretend that we didn't hear any of the other criticism at all. And it's just not doing anybody any good. So, okay, we have Pulo, who is the crown prince, getting the letter from that has the seal on it, and he's with the general at this time. The two of them are underground because he has been in charge of enforcing, like, discipline and keeping an eye on the production of the grand tunnels, which he was put in charge of mostly because he is supposed to be a little bit too soft, and he has to learn how to force people to do what he wants them to do and be heartless, which I would like to believe that heartlessness is not something that you can learn, but I don't actually think that's true. I wish it were true so that I could believe that people with good hearts just stay that way forever, but I really do think that you can learn to cut yourself off from feeling empathy and compassion. To a degree, part of that is like a survival tactic. You can't always have sympathy and empathy in certain environments and, like, survive. So This must be a forgery, Tognetti said after he was finished. The Crown Prince shook his head. The impression of the imperial seal is real. See how there's a chip in the corner? I saw the seal often as a boy. It's authentic. Then there must be some mistake. Why would the emperor suddenly decide to strip you of your title and make your little brother the Crown Prince? And what is that packet? It's poison, Prince Pullo said. He's afraid that I might engage in a war of succession with my brother. None of this makes sense. You're the gentlest among your brothers. You have trouble even ordering these laborers whipped. My father is a difficult man to read. Nothing his father did shocked Pullo anymore. He had seen trusted advisers beheaded because of one careless comment. Pullo had defended them time and time again, trying to save their lives, and for that his father had always considered him weak. That was why he had been assigned to this project in the first place. We must go to the emperor and ask him to explain this. Pullo sighed. Once my father's mind is made up, it cannot be changed. He must have decided that my little brother is more suited to being emperor than I am. He's probably right. Gently, respectfully, he rolled up the letter and handed it back to the messengers. He emptied the contents of the sachet into his palm, revealing 2 large pills, and these he swallowed in one gulp. General, I'm truly sorry you chose to follow me instead of my brother. The Crown Prince lay down on the ground as if to sleep. After a while, he closed his eyes and stopped breathing. I know it makes me so heartless, but I started cracking up here. I actually, I was sitting next to Owen and, turned to him and I was like, you are not going to believe this thing that I just read. Basically, hey, so you shouldn't be king. Also, I don't trust you. Here's poison. Yeah, that seems right. Gulps it down. What? I mean, honestly, in many ways, maybe this does support the emperor's assertion that his son wasn't strong enough, because he doesn't, he immediately capitulates and even thinks that maybe his dad is right. But, that he's been through so much trying to defend against his father that when the general's maybe we should go find him and talk to him about this, he truly doesn't see a point. And we know that the emperor is so close to death that even if they had decided to go and talk to him about it, it's 10-1 the emperor is in no state to have a conversation anyway. But it's just so uneventful that not only is he going to be stripped of his position, but told to commit suicide, and he puts up absolutely no fight at all. So Tognetti knelt down and held the young man's inert body. Through his tears, he saw that the messengers had all drawn their swords. So this is how my service to Zana is repaid, he said. His cries of rage echoed in the tunnels long after they cut him down. Yikes. Is Pullo here? The emperor asked. He could barely move his lips. Soon, just a few more days, Pyrrha said. The emperor closed his eyes. Pyrrha waited for an hour. He leaned down and felt nothing emanating from the emperor's nostrils. He reached out and touched the emperor's lips. They were cold. The emperor is dead. Long live the emperor. So then we have Prince Loshi and Krupo, who is now the regent. This is a really gross and deeply upsetting section because, not to get too political, but I'm going to get too political right here as I tear my own skin off on camera. We live in an age where people are willing to believe something that is being disproven before their very eyes simply because someone is telling them that's the truth, even though no evidence supports it whatsoever. It is the stupidest shit you've ever seen, and it happens everywhere, and it's incredibly dispiriting, and the weak-mindedness of some people blows me away. It's just... So what happens here? I'm getting ahead of myself here. Krupo decides to make a display of power after he realizes that there are a lot of people whispering about how, like, this whole ascension isn't legit, and that strange circumstances surround the emperor's death, and that maybe he was murdered and the whole thing, Krupo decides that he is going to figure out who it is that doubts him by bringing a deer with a giant rack of antlers to the throne room where the new emperor, the young child, is sitting on his throne, and says, "Don't you like this horse that I brought you?" "I don't see a horse, I see a deer." Krupo bowed deeply again. "Sire, you are mistaken, but that is to be expected since you are young and still have much to learn. Perhaps the other ministers and generals here can help enlighten you." So, we get a bunch of people who see a very fine horse, a beautiful horse, an admirable horse. "You must listen to the wise regent. That is a horse. Anyone who says that is a deer must face my sword." But some ministers, and especially the generals, shook their heads in disbelief. "This is shameful," said General Thumiyuma, who had been in the Zana army for more than 50 years. "That is a deer. Krupo, you may be powerful, but you cannot make men believe or say what is not true." "What is truth?" the regent said, enunciating his words carefully. "What happened in the Grand Tunnels? What happened on the island of Ekofi? These things must be written down in the history books, and someone has to decide what should be written." Emboldened by General Yuma, more ministers stepped forward and declared that the regent had brought a deer to the Grand Audience Hall, but the pro-horse party refused to back down, and the two sides got into a shouting match. Krupo smiled and stroked his chin thoughtfully. Emperor Irishi looked from one side to the other and laughed. He thought it was yet another of Krupo's strange jokes. As the months went by, fewer and fewer of those who stood up against Krupo on that day remained. Many were discovered to be co-conspirators of the disgraced Prince Pulo, and from prison they wrote, after some convincing, tearful confessions of their crimes against the throne. Which, again, Prince Pulo, like, all of a sudden now he's somebody who's, trying to usurp, like, he was in line for power anyway. But, yeah, okay. They and their families were executed. That was the law of Zana. Treason was a taint in the blood, and 5 generations would pay for the crime of one, which, again, is just crazy to me. Even General Yuma turned out to be one of the ringleaders in the failed plot. Indeed, there was evidence that he had also tried to conspire with the emperor's other surviving brothers. Those other princes all swallowed poison just as the emperor's palace guards were about to seize them. Unlike the other conspirators, though, Yuma refused to confess after being shown incontrovertible proof of his guilt. The emperor was utterly devastated by the news of this betrayal. "If he would just confess," the emperor said, "I would spare him considering his service to Zana." "Alas," the regent said, "we tried to help him regain his conscience through the judicious application of physical pain which cleanses the soul, but he is very stubborn." "How can anyone be trusted if even the great Yuma thought to rebel?" The regent bowed and said nothing. The next time the regent brought his horse to the Grand Audience Hall, everyone agreed that it was a very fine horse indeed. The young Emperor Irishi was at a loss. "I still see antlers," he muttered to himself. "How can that be a horse?" "Don't worry about it, Renga," Pyrrha whispered next to his ear. "You still have much to learn." Is that some depressing shit or what? Jesus Christ. So that's that first chapter. I'm going to have to speed it up to cover the second one, but there was just so much to talk about. So much happens. So chapter 6, Chiesa, the 8th month in the 3rd year of the reign of righteous force, which is what he calls his reign. This adorable little 12-year-old who just wants to be a sweet little cinnamon roll and not do bad things. Bless his heart. Righteous force, said the cinnamon roll. Okay, so we have 2 men, Huno Krima and Zopa Shigin, who are being conscripted from the village of Chiesa to fulfill the yearly quota of corvée laborers. Now, it is a famine. And as they travel to their point of destination to start this labor, it is obvious that they're going to have like half the population by the end of this that they do now, because there are just bodies littering the sides of the road. And the fact that so many laborers are being taken to build these ridiculous tunnels, which I guess this cinnamon roll has decided is going to keep doing. He's going to continue that stupid ass project. That has weakened the farms, and there are many women who are having to try and manage these entire estates by themselves, which of course doesn't go anywhere good. They can't manage it alone, and the weather is conspiring so that everything is like rotting rather than actually like blooming, and there's going to be practically no harvest at all. And the harvest that there will be is going to be collected by tax collectors. So everyone is starving. And the regent and the emperor are quite annoyed that progress has been so slow on the eternal house for the emperor's father. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought it was the tunnels. This is like for a fucking pyramid. If you are late by 1 day, you will each lose 1 ear. If you are late by 2 days, you will each lose an eye. If you are late 3 days, you will each die. But if you are late by more than that, your wives and mothers will be sold to the brothels, and your fathers and children will be condemned to conscripted hard labor forever. Which, guess what? It's really hard to control how long it takes to get somewhere when it's storming and you don't have like regular roads and gas-powered vehicles and whatever. And so they begin to fall behind. Shocker. And it really gets to a point where they've fallen so far behind that they know they're going to die. And what's the point of even worrying about it? If we're going to die, and we're maybe late enough for our entire family to die, why are we even going to show up at all? Why are we going to continue with this ridiculous, like, there's a point where fear overstretches itself and makes it so that you don't have anything left to lose. So we have the caravan, who I really like the detail that a lot of the soldiers that are like with the caravan are locals, like some of them. So when things go down a little bit later, they're not willing to turn on the people from their own land. I like that, we're supposed to be the united countries of Zana, under Zana, but that tribalism still remains. There's no way to get rid of that. You don't just, they were still in Nappy, still about 50 miles from the port of Canfin, but the roads were too muddy for the carriages, and even if they somehow made it to the coast, no ship would agree to set sail in this weather. Yesterday was the last day when they still realistically had a chance of making it to the mouth of the Liru River and sailing up to Pan before the deadline. Each minute that passed meant a worse fate awaited them and their families. So they decide that they're going to pool their money and get a good dinner, because they're going to be cripples and blind and deaf or whatever pretty soon. So they may as well live it up on this last day. So they go and get this amazing fish, silver-scaled, rainbow-finned, as long as his arm. The men felt their mouths water. They hadn't eaten fresh fish in so long. So these two kids come forward who are like, yeah, we're good cooks. We'll do this. And they are in the middle of cleaning it when they come back running in and are like, you guys should come see this. And there is a scroll, a silk scroll in the belly of the fish filled with Zindari letters. And it says, Huno Krima will be king. So we find out a little bit later that some god who does not really give a shit who's king decided that he was a little tired of waiting for this war to start, and that he may as well just throw something out there to make that shit happen. And I mean, it seems a little absurd until you think about, like, what if suddenly all of Twitter posted at the exact same time, Natasha Winters of Denison, Texas should be president 2020. If like 60 million people tweeted that at the same time. I'm nobody. But that kind of attention and something happening that's so inexplicable, there are going to be a million people that think this is meant to be for some reason, that there's a reason this happened, that there are forces at work, whatever. You know, whether you're religious or just superstitious, it's unavoidable at this point. Oh, Kyle Summers says, it's quick, but right before the two guys go read the scroll, they turn to each other and say, no turning back now. Oh, you're right. The men got up on their unsteady feet. Huno Krima and Zopa Shigin lingered behind for a moment and gave each other meaningful looks. This is it, said Shigin. No way out now, agreed Krima. So I guess that they planted it there? It felt like one of the gods said later that they did it. Help me out here, Kyle. I'll read that section, of course, with the gods a little bit later. But yeah, like, this is just, it's one of those, like, those things that it seems like, how can an entire war start because of this? But I think it's 100% believable. I think the God says they didn't do it. Oh, really? All right. Well, once I get there. So for now, they are going to do their best to make this prophecy happen. And I can't help but wonder how much these guys thought this would work. Like, I don't know how you plant something like that. I guess you could just shove it down the fish's mouth, right? Into its stomach. It's a big old fish, so you'd have to be like up to your elbow probably, but it's manageable. Just as wax clumps that refuse to be shaped properly would be scraped away by the writer to be replaced by new pliant wax, so would men who resisted the fates be swept away to be replaced by those sensitive to the shifts of fortune. What did it mean that the typhoons were sweeping the coasts of the islands more than ever before? What did it mean that strange clouds and strange lights were seen all over Dara? What did it mean that the giant Krubans were sighted surfacing and breaching all over the western seas, but not around Rui? What was the message brought by the famines and plagues? Above all, what did the scroll in the belly of the fish tell the men who gawked at it, as Huno Krima and Zopa Shigin held it up to the light? We are dead men, Huno Krima said, and so are our families. We've run out of time. The men, packed into the kitchen, held their breaths and strained to hear. Krima wasn't speaking loudly, and the fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows across their faces. I don't like prophecies. They upset plans and make us into pawns of the gods. But it's even worse to resist a prophecy when it has been given. If we're already dead by the laws of Zana, and yet the gods tell us different, I'd rather listen to the gods. There are 30 of us here in this room. Throughout the city are many other Corvée crews just like us, marching to Pan without hope of getting there on time. All of us are the walking dead. We've got nothing to lose. Why should we submit to the words written in the Zana codes? I would rather we obey the words of the gods. The signs are everywhere that the days of Zana are numbered. Men made into slaves, women prostitutes, the old die of starvation, the young of banditry. While we suffer and know not why, the emperor and his ministers belch from a surfeit of sweetmeats fed to them by the soft hands of servant girls. This is not how the world was meant to be. Maybe it's time for a new story to be told by the wandering bards. So, then we have the two kids that were going to cook the fish who get sent up to, I don't know if it's just drug or simply get drunk, the two guards that are sent to accompany their caravan. But these two kids kill the guards. This moment is really like the two brothers like look at each other for a second and aren't sure if they can do this. And then Rotho just says, I won't be whipped to death like Pa, which being whipped to death is one of the most horrific things I can imagine. Like, So DeFiro plunged the knife through the ribcage of one of the soldiers right into his heart. He looked across at his brother, who had done the same with the other soldier. The expression on Rotho's face, a mixture of excitement, fear, and joy, made DeFiro sad. Little Rotho had always looked up to him. He had always believed that he would be able to protect his brother, and at this moment he felt that he had failed, even though Rotho looked so happy. Yeah, well, you know what? When a kid's like really excited to murder, I feel like that's a bad sign. Just saying. It's like, even if you're defending yourself, it shouldn't be fun. But this kid is not exactly defending himself, and it's still fun. So that's just does seem like it's leading to some bad things. So the two Imperial soldiers that show up are actually our friends Huno and Zopa, dressed in the uniforms of the men that they had killed earlier. And they go in to examine some other, another caravan, claiming that they're looking for a wanted man. But really what they do is tell all of the men their plan, and they get all of these people on their side. All of the laborers rise up, kill their guards in the sleep, and then start setting fire to the lodging houses and inns, which to me doesn't seem very fair, because the lodging houses and inns are under as much threat as anybody and probably didn't want to be here and doing this and housing all of these laborers and soldiers for free, doubtless. But what are you going to do? Soon the men in the streets, the beggars and the thieves, the starving and the bankrupt, the women who had watched their husbands and sons taken away to be slaves under the sea and in the mountains, took up the same chant. Brandishing only kitchen knives and bare fists, they rushed to the armory, broke in, and overwhelmed the soldiers guarding the doors. Now armed with real weapons, they attacked the army's granary, and soon bags of sorghum and rice and bundles of dried fish were traveling the streets, carried on the backs of men surging through the streets like flood currents. They ran to the mayor's office and took over the building. Someone cut down the white flag of Zana, charged with the Minjan falcon spreading its wings, and hoisted up a sheet on which the crude figure of a leaping fish had been drawn, silver-scaled, rainbow-finned, with a scroll around it filled with the letters, Huno Krima will be king. The soldiers of the local garrison, many of whom were from Kokru, refused to advance against their countrymen. The Zana commanders soon found themselves faced with the choice of surrender or being slaughtered by their own men. So now they're in charge of several thousand men. And they decide that now they are in some power, they're going to have to legitimize themselves a little bit, because they can't just like declare themselves kings. Like, obviously, there's a lot more power out there on other lands. Like, somebody's going to come to crush them. So they go and find the heir to the ancient throne of Kokru, rumored to be a shepherd in exile. And they are apparently going to like reinstate him. That's their goal. The Tiro states would reemerge from the ashes of the unification, and together they would topple the imperial throne in Pan. So, let's see, here it is. Here's the part with the gods. The peasants of Rui and Dasu huddled in their houses, praying that the rage of winged Kiji of Zana, god of winds and squalls, would not destroy the crops so close to harvest. If one listened carefully, one might make out a voice amid the claps of thunder and sheets of rain. I never thought you, Lutho of Han, would be the one to strike first. That bit with the fish in the scroll has your handiwork all over it. I assure you that I had nothing to do with it, my brother. It's true I have a knack for prophecies, but this one surprised me as much as you. Then it was the twins of Kokru, sisters of fire and ice? The mortals find signs where they will. We had nothing to do with starting this, but you can be sure we'll end it, even if Kokru lives on only in the heart of one man. Save your breath, you still have to find that one right man. So, damn, you're right, Kyle. I thought that the gods had stepped in and did this, but the gods are just talking about it. So I guess these guys set themselves up, but the gods still think that Kokru's, the two men who are supposedly in charge, are not the right men. So, I wonder if the gods are going to do anything. If they're going to step in, even though they said that they weren't going to. They claimed that they're not allowed, that this is part of their deal, but maybe not. So yeah, just a lot happened. A lot happened. The old emperor died. His son that was next in line killed himself. His youngest son gets put in power, but the regent who is there is like obviously a maniac. And then as like to honor his father and build this ridiculous friggin' pyramid is all I'm going to say about it. He starts conscripting even more men. And these men decide that they have nothing left to lose and plant a prophecy and then rise up and like take back a whole city. That's amazing. And I wish that we would just rise up and take back our whole cities, guys. There's so many of us and so few of them. Can't we just burn it all down? I feel like we should just be able to burn it all down. But you know, Kyle says same. Yeah, you know, like amen. But I guess whatever. So Kyle, this book is super good and I'm really enjoying it. And thank you for commissioning this. I'm really, really enjoying it. Like you can really, I can tell how much something is gripping me by how quickly it's over when I'm reading it for an assignment, because I'm very aware of how much time I'm spending reading when I'm reading before doing my broadcast. And, you know, if I have a moment of just like, oh God, I have so much more to get through and I'm starting in like 20 minutes. I hope I can. That's a sign that like, while I may not dislike what I'm reading, I'm definitely having this feeling of like, this is a chore, you know? And I feel like the word chore is too harsh because it really makes it sound like I hate what I'm doing. And that's not exactly what I mean. But you know what I like, that awareness of it. Whereas when I'm reading these chapters, I was just pouring through it. And by the time I got to the end of 6, I was like, oh, fuck. That's the end of it. Shit. Like, I just really wanted to read more. So that's a really good sign. So yeah, guys, you should check out this book. Thank you again to Kyle for commissioning this. Do you have any more questions you want to ask me, Kyle? Anything else you want to mention before I thank you for correcting me on the gods, because I totally like misinterpreted that whole thing. So yeah, everyone, I'm just so glad that the folks who've been commissioning stuff for Spoil Me all have such great taste. Thank you guys. You're great. And hopefully I will see you again soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.